Well, welcome everyone. My name is Michelle Beebe, and I am the Director of Training Services at the Change Companies. And thank you for joining us for today's 30-minute webinar. For those that may not know, we provide evidence-based solutions for behavior change using interactive journaling. And for the last 30 years, we've been supporting our clients in delivering the best behavior change programming to the people that they serve. Today, we're going to talk about part one of our Risky Thinking webinar series, and Karen Hellman is joining us, and she will walk us through how to recognize and assess these unhelpful thinking patterns when working with clients. This webinar presentation is 30 minutes with a 15-minute Q&A session at the end of the presentation for those who would like to participate. If you've attended a recent webinar, you've probably already know Karen Hellman. She is a senior training consultant for the Change Companies and the retired division director of inmate programs and reentry for Arizona Department of Corrections. She has over 20 years of experience working with justice of all populations and overseeing addiction treatment and reentry programs in correctional settings. So now, please welcome Karen Hellman.
Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you're coming from and where you're viewing the webinar. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Michelle, and I'm happy to be here and excited to be doing this topic. So before we actually get started into the actual meat of the presentation, let's do a couple quick polls here, sort of get a temperature check. So we have a scenario, and the first scenario is, you see, for some reason, there we go. Okay, so you're buying your family dinner, and you and your family, you're going out to dinner at a buffet. Your son, Johnny, he's 13. He slide a bill, appears much younger than he actually is. The adult ticket for the buffet costs $29, while the child ticket costs $12. Johnny doesn't eat much. He usually only goes up for one serving, and your family is on a budget. So, do you, A, buy a child ticket if asked and tell Johnny to say he's 11, B, buy an adult ticket for Johnny, or C, buy a child ticket but don't say anything to Johnny? So I'm going to launch the poll here. Take a moment and you go ahead and answer it. It'll appear on your screen here in a moment. And you can go ahead and vote. Okay, I'm going to close that poll. Looking like most people went with option B, buy an adult ticket for Johnny. If you did the buy the child ticket and asked Johnny to say he's 11 if asked. And some of you, by 11%, did buy a child ticket, but don't say anything to Johnny. So the next scenario is you got a report due, and one of your routine work tasks involves compiling a quarterly update report. It contains numerous figures and statistics. You strongly suspect that no one actually reads the report. It just gets filed away on the share drive. On Friday, you turn in the last quarter's report. When you arrive at work on Monday, you discover an email from one of your employees correcting the numbers that they sent to you that you were reporting on. Do you, A, figure that no one will actually read the report, but file that email away with the revised numbers just in case the issue comes up? B, make corrections to the report and reissue citing the corrections? C, make corrections to the report, but don't note that you made the changes? Or D, just delete the email and forget about it? So let me give you your second poll here. Take a moment and choose which one you go with. Okay, most of you have voted. I'm going to close the poll. So, wow, 97% of you went with B. You make the corrections, report you reissue it, citing the corrections. About 3% of you said you make the corrections, but you don't note that you made them. Thankfully, no one did A or in particular D to just delete the email and forget about it. So what's that all about? What are we here to talk about today? We're here to talk about thinking patterns. And thinking patterns, they exist in a continuum from healthy to risky. I mean, we all knew what was probably the most healthy way to respond to that. But as we move through life in different types of similar situations, most of us somewhere along the lines haven't made that choice. And we're going to talk about why that is and how that occurs. Today, the major talking points are, what are thought patterns? How do we develop them? How to recognize 8 common thought patterns? And then how do you assess your clients' thinking and thought patterns so that you can best assist them? So first of all, what is thinking patterns? What are thinking patterns? What is a thought pattern? And basically, a thought pattern, it's the mental framework through which we assess and we move through the world. We all develop self-talk about life in the world. If you've worked in any helping profession for any length of time, you've likely have already at least intuitively identified that clients fall into loops or styles of thinking that do not always serve them well. You may have identified some of your own patterns. Some of you may have been already exposed to this, and you may have heard of criminal thinking. Yockelson and Samenow are the pioneers in this field. There's a whole list of particular ways of thinking that criminals tend to engage in more than other folks. You may have heard of David Burns. He's done great work on the idea of cognitive distortions and how that relates to mood therapy. Depending on what field you work in, they may call it one thing, they may call it another. Sometimes there's a list of 10 of them, sometimes there's 25, sometimes they're very specific. Sometimes you look at a longer list of 25 and you go, those are very close. Which is that? Which is, is it exactly this? Is it exactly that? What we're talking about today is we're really not going to worry about the actual, getting down to the nitty-gritty and the actual label. We're talking about the overall thought pattern and how you can recognize when you and more importantly, your client are engaging in some risky thinking. So how do we develop these thought patterns? Well, our thinking is shaped by family, friends, and life experiences. Let's use the example we just went through with little Johnny in the buffet. If I'm Johnny's mom and I choose the option of buying the adult ticket, well, what goes into Johnny's little bucket of his framework of how we move throughout the world and think about the world is that there are rules there and we follow the rules. If I buy the child ticket and I don't say anything to Johnny, he may or may not notice. So it might depend on what goes in his bucket. It may be neutral, but he may see it and wonder, why didn't she buy the ticket? Well, maybe sometimes you follow rules, sometimes you don't follow rules, not really sure about that. That goes into his bucket. If I actually tell Johnny, hey, if they ask you, say you're 11, essentially lie and say you're 11, well, now I've what's gone into Johnny's thought bucket is, well, rules aren't always meant to be followed. Laws are always meant to be followed. We follow it when we want to, and sometimes we don't, and that we're not even honest about not following it. So the factors that lead to risky thinking, it's multifaceted and it's complex. It's all these experiences, it's all these exposures that sort of develop into, okay, this is how I'm going to move through the world. And the self-talk, it exists in our thought patterns, they exist on a continuum of healthy to risky. Now, you'll notice again that we're calling this risky thinking and thinking patterns. We specifically are not calling it criminal thinking because we want to be able to engage all of our types of clients in this work. because we all engage in thought patterns. We all have thought patterns, and we all sometimes engage in risky patterns. It depends on the degree. It's a matter of degree. It's a matter of frequency. But by looking at it as just thought patterns, we can help all types of clients develop healthier, responsible thinking. So to get into 8 specific sort of global thought patterns that folks and people can fall into. And the first one is making excuses. Now, people who use this kind of pattern, they excuse and justify their problem behaviors. They place the responsibility of their actions and situations on others, in their lives or on other people. Some related thinking errors that you may have heard related to this are blame, deferment, lack of ownership. The major thinking error that feeds into this is modification. What this sounds like in a client that you're working with are statements like, it's not my fault that I'm late. My mom didn't wake me up. I hit her because she made me. As you can see, these vary in intensity. I mean, the last one we're talking about here. Sorry, I advanced here. Let me read back. The restaurant is the example we just did. Are you going to end up in prison or in jail or in major trouble if you're doing that? Probably not. But it's definitely on that continuum. But then we go to the, I hit her because, you made me angry. She made me angry. That's far, far along the path of risky thinking and can really cause problems for folks. The next one is ignoring responsible action. Now, the people who engage in this type of thinking and thought patterns, they eliminate any sensitivity to the consequences of their behavior. They find ways to get rid of their worries or fears about committing irresponsible acts. Some related thinking errors to this include I can't, failure to endure adversity, corrosion. The big one is cutoff. Cutoff is just immediately say, I'm never going to think about that. Sort of that Scarlett O'Hara, I'll think about that tomorrow or not think about it at all. A lot of times the cutoff, people will use drugs or alcohol to numb that. If I take, if I get high, then I'm not even thinking about the consequences of my actions. I can just do things. I've worked in this field for a long time. I've worked with a lot of clients who say, they would get drunk or high before committing a crime because they knew inside that was not what was the most pro-social thing to do. But they didn't want to hear that voice, so they got drunk or high. They didn't have to hear it. Types of statements you'll hear related to this are, I give up, learning this new software is too hard, do it the old way. It doesn't really matter. If I don't certify test tonight, I'm just going to cram in the morning. All the way to that sort of F it, I need a drink, gonna just not even think about it. The next type of thought pattern is asserting power over others. And the person who does this, they're really focused on gaining power and control over others. When they're engaging in this, they use this pattern. They may use threats, they may use intimidation, manipulation, guilting others. Related thinking area, big one is manipulation, but the primary one is power orientation. It's all about getting what I want. Ways you'll hear this expressed are, if you really love me, you would. I mean, that's classic guilting. Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry. That's a direct threat. That's far along the path. My house, my rules. You don't like it, there's a door. Now, how many of you who are parents who have not probably said that at some point? So again, we're talking, this is on a continuum. Now, the last one, my house, my rules, there's the door. If you don't like it, sometimes in the right situation, that's an appropriate thought pattern, appropriate way to assess and move through that situation. But if I'm constantly falling into that way of thinking, and I'm doing that in my relationships, I'm gonna have a hard time keeping in relationships. If it's always my way, my rules, or there's a door, people aren't going to stick around for very long. Next one, this is one of my personal favorites. It's called self-serving acts of kindness. And the people who engage in this, they excuse the harm that they do to others by saying you're doing other things in an effort to feel better about themselves. The idea is sort of that by doing good in one area of their life, it gives them a free pass to do bad actions in other areas of life. Thinking errors related to this include building up oneself as a good person, and religion or religiosity. The biggest one, the primary one, is sentimentality. What this sounds like when you're working with folks are statements like, I support many charities, says the person who's a major tax cheat. I'm a great parent to my kids. We do all sorts of fun things together. Meanwhile, this client is not paying the required child support. But they're thinking that because we go out and we have fun, well, I don't need to pay the child support. One balances out the other. And that, I would never disrespect my mom, but treat her like a queen, says the person who is abusing their spouse. So again, you can see this is sort of this trade-off. If I'm doing good here, then this other stuff doesn't matter so much. The fifth one is getting away with anything. People who use this type of thinking pattern, I think they're too cool for school. They're too slick. They're charming. And they're too smart to ever get caught in any of their negative or antisocial behavior. They don't think they're ever going to be called to account to face the negative consequences of what they're doing. Related thinking errors to this include failure to consider injury to others, failure to assume obligations. The biggest thinking error, the primary thinking error, is super optimism. And types of statements you hear is, it doesn't matter if I use my work time for a second job. I've worked from home. They'll never know. You know, I'm cheating, but that's okay. My partner, they're never going to learn about that. And I've had drinks plenty of times and driven, and I've never had any issues. Again, it's sort of this, I think I can do anything. I can do it forever, and I'm never going to get away with it. This one is really interesting. If you are actually working in the criminal justice field, you will see and hear people actually expressing these kind of sentiments while they're sitting in front of you, incarcerated, and they still think that they can get away with anything. From your end, you're looking and going, well, that doesn't make any sense, because obviously you are now currently facing the consequences for your actions. But in the thought pattern, it's just sort of, well, this was an anomaly. This will never happen again. And I can go back out and continue to do the same thing I'm doing, and I'm never going to get caught. Sixth type of thought pattern that we're going to discuss is lazy thinking. The people who engage in this pattern, they take the path of least resistance, and they look for the easiest shortcuts instead of working towards specific and realistic goals. Quite often, the shortcuts really don't work out well at all. It's almost sort of a magical thinking, that things are just going to magically happen, like, where a child is just going to happen. Some related thinking errors include a failure to make an effort to endure adversity, mind reading, labeling, mislabeling. The major thinking error associated with this is cognitive indolence. What this sort of sounds like when you're working with clients is, I'll just open my own business and I'll be rolling in the money. Yeah, we all know it's that simple, right? You just hang out your shingle and suddenly you've got people banging down the door. It's that magical thinking that it's just going to be so much easier to open my own business than actually working for someone. Whereas most folks who've had their own business know that if you have your own business, usually you're working harder than if you're working for someone else. You're putting in many more hours. What do I need to learn how to do basic math? My phone is a calculator. Okay, who amongst us has not engaged in this? Now, is this kind of thinking going to get you into serious trouble? No, but it is along that path. Because we all know the reason you learn to do basic math is so that even though your phone is a calculator, it lets you know, maybe you enter the number wrong. And so if I'm doing, 400 times 8 and I come up with an answer of 32, I'm like, oh, well, wait, that doesn't make any sense. I probably put the number in wrong. I can't tell you what the exact answer is supposed to be, but that just doesn't look right. But if I don't have that basic math foundation, I can't do that. And then, I've no need to even talk to that person. I already know what they're going to say. and what they're thinking. That one, again, we talk about relationships. That's further along the path because you're getting into mind reading. The person may be doing this because they're afraid of confrontation, because it's too much effort, whatever it is. But it's lazy thinking because they don't know what that person's going to say. They don't know the situation. A sense of being above the law. People who engage in this pattern, they see the world around them existing almost solely for their personal benefit. They confuse their wants and wishes as needs. What they want takes precedence over rules, laws, and other people. Thinking related to this is ownership. Ownership being I see it, I want it, it's mine. But the major thinking error related to this is entitlement. This sounds like they owe it to me after all I've been through. It's okay for me to use this for work. I need downtime. I can use that sick day. Or even, oh, that's just a stupid law. No one follows it. Again, most of us speed. And we tell ourselves the risky thinking is a stupid law, no one follows it. And then we get mad when we're pulled over and given a speeding ticket. So it's along that continuum. It's getting, it's not completely risky because in most cases, unless we're doing criminal speeding, we're just going to get a ticket. But it's along that path already, where we put our foot onto that path and we're headed towards risky thinking. Getting sidetracked thought pattern, that person who engages in this, they're often easily distracted. And it's not because they're actually ADD or ADHD. These people come out, they have the best of intentions, but they have trouble being consistent. They don't regularly follow through with their goals and commitments. This pattern is very difficult to change because the lack of consistency causes a sort of seesaw behavior. One day they're doing really well, the next day they're not. And their good intentions quickly shrivel without a lot of reinforcement. This is what I personally like to call the adulting is hard thought pattern. Getting up every day, doing what you're supposed to be doing is not easy, but that's what adulting is. What this sounds like is I wanted to complete 3 applications today, but then my brother showed up at the apartment. My prescription is empty, almost empty, but I'll be good for a while without it. I've been on time for 2 weeks. Why are you getting in my case for being 20 minutes late today? Again, in the last one, you can very clearly see it. It's like, they were making the effort. They got there, for 2 weeks, and that should be good enough. Not understanding, well, if you're working a job, you need to be on time every day. So since risky thinking, it occurs, those were the 8 major ones thought patterns we're talking about. And since this occurs on that continuum, what you're going to want to do with clients is you want to assess the degree to which they engage in these behaviors so that you can better assist them and measure their progress. Because the ideal is if you're working with a client, if they're engaging risky, they're very far along that continuum, that after a while of working with it, they'll challenge their thinking and engage in more healthy thinking that they can actually see, oh yeah, I used to think this way, but now I think this way. But there are instruments out there that can directly or indirectly help these efforts. The first one is if you're working with the criminal justice population, a great one is Texas Christian University Criminal Thinking Scales. 37 items, has 6 subscales. It's self-administered. It's a paper pen version of it. I believe they actually even now have an online version of it. Very easy to score, very easy to understand. And one of the best things about it, it's free, it's public domain, so you're not having to pay for it. Another way that you can start to measure and clients can start to measure and look at their thinking is the use of thought records. Now, this isn't a sit down, take an assessment, rate it. This is an ongoing project that they do, and it's used as part of cognitive behavioral therapy. And what the client does is they identify and they record their thoughts, and then they search for evidence and counter thoughts to say, okay, that was my thought when this originally happened. Situation happened. I thought B, outcome C. all right, situation A happened. What are some counter thoughts? How can I challenge those thoughts? And then what might be the outcome? And again, that's self-administered. Clients do it on their own, and they do it as situations, but you can actually talk someone through this if you like. There are various other instruments and records out there. What you're going to want to do is you're going to search around and find the best one that best fits your client, because there's tons of them. And it's going to depend on what type of population that you are working with to see which is going to best suit what you're doing. One of the major ones out there is cognitive distortion scales. There's dysfunctional attitude scale and automatic thoughts questionnaire. Those last two, there's been tons of research done on them. There's lots of subscales that are measuring specific types of thought patterns or thought clusters. And so you want to go out there and say, okay, if I'm working this type of client, which is, what am I trying to assess for? What type of thing am I trying to assess for, and which best fits this client? These particular three, they're now public domain, and they're going to require some training to be able to administer and to utilize. But it's worth taking the time to find which best suits your clients. Now, if I'm working in a general mental health setting, coming in and giving someone the criminal thinking scales is probably not the best assessment. So as we talk about assessing, you're going to look at some best practices and things to keep in mind. One of the first ones that I'll talk about is try to avoid the Cosmo quiz effect. For those of you who may be younger than me, or for our male population watching today, you may not be aware of that. A lot of women are. What this really is that if you can avoid having the label of what you're trying to assess at the top of the paper or at the top of the screen, it avoids that tendency to, oh, I'm taking this quiz and I can be a glamour girl, I can be a down home girl, I can be a bookworm, I can be whatever. And the four are listed. And so I know, okay, well, I know what answers to give because I want it to turn out. I want to be the glamour girl. So if I'm giving criminal thinking scales and I have a big label at the top saying criminal thinking scales, well, people are smart enough to go, oh, well, I know what answer to give so that I don't end up showing as having criminal thinking. The other best practice is to find an instrument that fits your population. We talked about that already. Again, it's going to be what are the issues you're addressing with that client? So what kinds of thought patterns are you looking for in that client? You want to ensure that your staff are properly trained in the administration, scoring, and interpretation of the assessments. The administration, sometimes you may actually, I'm not a big person who likes to script things in therapy or in helping courses and classes, but it may be that you're very clear on, okay, to the client that, you sit down, it's a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the most, whatever the instrument is measuring. And you want to make sure that who's ever administering that goes over everything that client needs to know about it to be able to give the most accurate answers that actually reflect their thought patterns. If the person is actually scoring it, you want to make sure they're trained in it, because a lot of these instruments have some questions that are reverse scored. So, normally a 5 gets into one bucket, but in this particular question, it gets shifted into a different bucket of thought patterns. So they need to be aware of that and very careful when they're scoring. So they don't just go down to all think, okay, all 5s means this or all 1s means that. They really need to know that well so that they're scoring it correctly. And then you want to train them on interpretation. What does this mean? And this really relates to if you're doing treatment plans. So if I'm looking at this thought pattern, a person has the thought pattern of making excuses, and I look at the instrument, oh yeah, they really scored high in making excuses. Well, I can make that part of their treatment plan. I can make it very specific. So instead of just saying that we need to address the risky thinking, I can say you need to address your thought pattern of making excuses. And then you can come up with very concrete goals on how to do that rather than being just a general address your risky thinking. Something to think about with this also is in administration is make sure that you've got a quiet place, a private place where the person's taking it. I'll use that the timing is correct. I'll use an example that happened to me years ago. This was related to an education test, but it still shows how it can really impact what your results are. We started to get lower. It was an intake test related to basic education, and we started to know scores really started to drop. And we're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. There's no reason why our intakes would suddenly have this drop. Then we investigated it, and we found, oh, well, unbeknownst to us at the facility, they'd moved the testing to 4 o'clock in the morning before breakfast, and we're telling everyone taking it, well, you take this, and when you're done with it, then you can go have breakfast. Well, as you can imagine, people were pencil whipping it, not even thinking it as they went through. So again, that's something to think about, when you're assessing is what messages are you giving to the person, and is it the right time, the right place, is it quiet, is the person in privacy? You're also going to want to plan for any needed accommodations. Are there any language barriers? Are there any physical barriers? Is there a reading limitation, level limitation? And know your clients and your populations well enough to be able to say, okay, well, maybe for this person, I need an interpreter in the room with them. Or maybe I can actually get the instrument in their preferred language. If it's someone who has lower reading or lower comprehension levels, maybe we need to walk the person through question by question rather than just hand them a paper and have them answer it, because they may not understand some of the words and they're just going to answer it and just guess because they don't understand what the meaning of the word is. So again, plan for those needed accommodations that your clients may have. And then you want to determine the proper frequency of assessing. Changing thought patterns doesn't happen overnight, so you don't want to assess weekly. You're not going to see much movement. A lot of people will assess about a 90-day during 90-day intervals. You definitely want to do a pre-intervention, whatever your intervention is, assessment, and then do a post, because then that lets you know, is your client actually making progress, or are they still stuck in the same thought pattern, and do we need to continue to work on this? So I'm at the point where I'm going to turn it back over to Michelle, because we have some questions and answers. So Michelle, trying to figure out how to turn it back over to you.
Oh, you can keep
You got it?
going. I'll just have you
Okay.
click through. All
Okay.
right. So, thank you, Karen. And I do have a few questions that have come through for the chat, as also anybody that put questions in the registration. We are going to try and address some of those as well. So the first question actually comes from Dwayne in Ohio. And his question is about, can risky thinking lead to short-term or long-term health concerns?
Excellent question. Yes, it can, particularly when we talk about, when we're talking about that one where the type of thinking pattern where the person is, they've got the good intentions and they wither away. You see that a lot with, again, adherence to prescriptions. So yeah, and that kind of person, you're going to want to, if you identified that thought pattern in that person, you're really going to do lots of reminders. And maybe you do daily, maybe you schedule daily text messages. Hey, take your medication. You want to accommodate for that. So yeah, the risky thinking can affect health in that way. It can also affect it, because if I'm really engaging in risky thought patterns and I'm getting far along the continuum, I can be putting myself in a lot of dangerous situations. So maybe more at risk for, if I'm drunk driving, I'm more at risk for getting hurt. So it can impact it in both ways.
Great, thank you. The next question is from Milton in Hawaii. He actually has two questions. Many of these patterns are used by normal people. How and when does this tip into criminal thinking?
Again, another good question. Yeah, many of these patterns, and most of them are used. Most people use these thought patterns at least at one point. When it tips into criminal thinking, is when it becomes a consistent way of moving throughout the world, when it's always your go-to thought pattern, because it leads to more and more actual irresponsible behavior. And the more irresponsible behavior you have, the more likely to then to have an intersection with the criminal justice system and criminal thinking. Again, one of the examples we used earlier was, the idea of, there's a difference between saying, if you really love me, you would, um, as opposed to, don't make me angry. You really wouldn't like me when I'm angry. So it's really the degree and the frequency of which the person is using it that tips into criminal thinking. And the person may end up in the criminal justice system. They may not. We all know that not everyone gets caught. Most eventually do, but they don't. But you can be engaging in the criminal thinking before you actually end up in the criminal justice system. And again, it's a matter of degree and frequency. If all of my world interactions and all my worldview are processed through these, and I'm using the more extreme versions of it, I'm down that path. Now I'm into criminal thinking, whether I'm actually have been arrested or incarcerated or not.
Great. Yeah, Milton's other question was specifically about their CBT programs. So post-test results are pretty good, but retention is poor even a couple months later. There's a significant loss of learning. What do you do to increase long-term retention?
Um, and that's part of that thought pattern of giving up and, and walking away from it, not remaining committed. A lot of that you can do by one, giving adequate positive reinforcement, so the person can actually start to see that they're making changes, and they can evaluate how it's impacting their lives. When we talked about, if you're using like thought records, it's a good idea to have the client hang on to those, and then periodically with them review it and see, okay, 3 months ago there was a situation, your initial thought pattern was XYZ. You developed some counter thoughts, you recently encountered that situation again, what did you do? And sometimes it can say, oh, well, you know what, I had thought that through, and so this time, instead of doing A, I actually did B, and man, the outcome was much better. So sometimes helping them to see the progress, because sometimes they get lost and they're not seeing that there's any progress. So helping them to see the progress can keep them retained. Like sometimes using technology, sending out reminders if you're losing nutrition because they're not showing up for sessions, of, hey, remember, yeah, you have a session tomorrow. So there's those kinds of things that you can do to address it.
Great. I think we have like 4 more questions. This next question is from Ramona. What if an individual's thought patterns are distorted and they do not recognize it? They think it's normal. How would you approach that?
Well, what you don't want to do is get into a push me pull you. It's distorted and it's bad and it's unhealthy and it's risking you to change it. I mean, because if you just say that, they're just going to entrench further into their situation. And in the next webinar that we have scheduled, we're actually going to have some very concrete examples of ways to help people change their thinking. But if you're in that initial situation where they're not even aware of it, well, then you use, some motivational interviewing techniques to draw out of them, what isn't working in their life. And you don't have to get them. The point is, you don't have to get them to say, yes, I'm engaging in risky thinking. You want them to get to the point where they recognize that what they're currently doing is not meeting their needs or making them happy, or making them fulfilling their desires and wants. And if you can get them to that point, then that's when you start talking about, okay, so what are your thoughts behind it, and what are some other ways that we can look at this, or you can look at this, so that if you start looking at the world this way instead of through this framework, how much your decisions start to change and how much your outcomes start to change. But again, avoid that initial clash of, no, you're engaging in risky thinking, obviously you're going to be sitting here. That's a no-win game for anyone.
Great. The next question comes from Harry in North Carolina. Any strategies for remediating negative patterning with at-risk youths ages 12 through 18?
Great question. Great question, exciting question, because the older we get, the more the thought patterns become entrenched. Because again, we talked about it's that bucket of all these life experiences and our influences of family, friends, peers, coworkers. And so it's easier the earlier you can catch folks. So you're going to use the same techniques, but it's just that you're getting them earlier. One of the biggest challenges that you will have though with that population is that you're coming as the outsider, and at that, particularly in the teen years, they're really going to be talking about and really invested in. We all know, what their peers are thinking and how their peers are acting. So you want to take it one step removed from them and talk about, what works a lot of times with them are hypotheticals where it's not even you're having them address their thinking. You come up with a third person. Okay, let's talk about Susie. Well, if she does this, what do you think the outcomes are going to be? And by removing that one person away, it's less personalized, and you're less likely to get into that tug and that push me pull you. But again, that's the ages you want to start working with these folks. The earlier you can catch these thought patterns that are risky, and have the person move towards healthier thought patterns, the more success you're going to have.
Yeah, that's a great point, Karen. Our last question, I know there's a few more, but we are out of time, but the last question comes from Victor in Maryland, and he wants to understand how he can apply these concepts in a couple therapy situation.
Oh, couples therapy. Well, you can apply in couples therapy, and I actually think it could actually be very useful. In that kind of scenario, what I would use is I would have the clients do those thought reports we're talking about and actually process them in the session, because there tends to be a lot of that sort of lazy thinking and, oh, I know what the person's thinking and what they're going to say, so I'm going to go talk to that person. So sometimes, if you either have them do the outside of session or even just use the format to process it in session. So, I'm saying, okay, well, when my partner didn't take out the situation is my partner didn't take out the garbage. So my thoughts, I thought, well, obviously they don't care about me, they don't respect me, they don't love me. They just think that I'm not worth, that they don't have to do anything that I should do at all. And then so, the outcome was I got mad and we got in a screaming match. I processed that through, and a lot of times that person would say, oh, well, no, actually I didn't take out the garbage because I went to take it out and there was a phone call, and then I just forgot, and oh my goodness, I'm sorry. So using those thought records within a couples therapy a lot of times can reduce that miscommunication and it lets the other entity know what was going on in that person's mind when they made that choice, when they performed that behavior. And a lot of times there is that mind reading sort of that goes on, and this helps cut through that. So it can be very useful in couples therapy.
Great, thank you, Karen. And yeah, thank you for all of you who submitted wonderful questions. I know, sorry, we didn't have more time to go through all of them. But there is a great opportunity. So for you today, you've kind of gained a foundational understanding of risky thinking patterns, including how to recognize and evaluate them. So what are your next steps? Well, we invite you to join us in June, Thursday, June 15th, for our Risky Thinking Part 2 to actually learn about effective strategies for addressing these helpful thinking patterns that we've kind of talked about today. So look for an email from the Change Companies in the coming weeks to register for the Part 2 of this webinar series. Additionally, as a reminder, we will be sending out a link to the webinar recording and a PDF summary within the next 2 days, so keep a lookout for that. And then finally, for those wanting a deeper dive into some of the risky thinking patterns that were discussed here, or just some strategies around how you can start implementing those with a client that you're working with. We also provide on-demand training and resources on our Fidelity platform. So please feel free to give us a call at 888-889-8866 to learn more, or visit our website at changecompanies.net. And thank you again for joining us today. This is a great kickoff for our webinar series, and we look to see you next time.
Thank you all. Appreciate your attendance.
Yes, thank you very much.